Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Observable Flutter. My name is Craig Labenz, and I am excited today to talk about the package Stacked from creator and Flutter GDE, Dane Mackier. Wait, oh no, I just realized I yet again forgot to get confirmation of your last name's pronunciation. I do this all the time. Well, that'll be the first order of business in just a second, Dane. But for starters here, we've got just our little bit of typical housekeeping to cover. And folks, that is the code of conduct. We're going to talk about, I think, a pretty darn cool Flutter package today. But of course, all good Flutter packages have other good alternatives. So let's stay focused on Stacked today. We're just going to talk about that. We're not really going to bother comparing it to other things out there. There's plenty of time for that in the future. Today, we're exploring Stacked. Let's also remember, just be kind to each other, kind to other technologies, all that great stuff. Okay, without further ado, I'm excited to start talking with Dane. Dane,
Hey.
would you say a few words about yourself?
Yeah, well, thank you for the introduction. My surname is Mackier, so Dane Mackier. Um,
Mackier. Okay, all right.
Mackier, yeah. Um, yeah, so I'm Dane. I have a YouTube channel called FilledStacks. I actually started it when I was transitioning from Xamarin over to Flutter. So I used to run an agency for 4 years where I just built like Xamarin apps. And then I saw Flutter and I tested it out and I immediately like fell in love with it. So I was like, I need to swap like all my clients over to this. And at that time, I wanted to ensure that there's like standards of production, like how to do your dependency inversion and all these things. And I couldn't find much. And so as I was exploring, I was documenting that through my YouTube. That then grew. And that's what I became known for mostly. Like even though I did like games development and like Xamarin and native things. And so then that's how I built my community and started to focus specifically on like testable and maintainable code that's structured well. So that's my first thing that I always focus on because I do like TDD style programming. It needs to be
Mm,
testable when I write my code. And when I shared my like one of my clients' architectures that I use for the app, like I got a lot of comments asking if it's available. And so I decided, oh, instead of redoing this for every app, I'm just gonna like make it a package, and I just combine the best of the other packages. So I didn't build my own dependency inversion. I didn't build my own state management. I used like Provide at the time. I used Getit for that, and I used like Auto Route for the navigation. Just combined it, and now I have this like one package that has like everything that I need. And on top of that, I built CLI and some form functionality. Um, yeah, that's
interesting.
basically how we got to this point.
Nice. Okay. So when you mention using these other packages, are you kind of replicating their ideas, or are you literally just using them as dependencies in your own package?
I'm using them as dependencies. So one of the things I didn't want to do is like reinvent the wheel. So Remy
Hmm.
did a good job with like Provider and with Riverpod,
Hmm.
but I needed a very small subset of both of that package's functionality. And so I started with a change notifier. At first, I actually used the scope model. So it shows you when I started with the Flutter stuff. Scope
Hmm.
model was like,
That's early
that's how I
days.
built one of the first, yeah, like one of the first apps. And so I kept reproducing the same architecture with a different package. And so eventually I was like, okay, I'm just going to put this all together and like kind of create a framework system because I grew the agency at that point to about 16 people. And so we needed to build many apps with the same architecture. You could swap over, jump around, and there needed to be like a consistent way of building it. And so I chose the packages that I thought was the best at what they do. I still think they're the best. The only the only caveat with that is auto route. So I reached out to the author and I forked their functionality so it stays up to date with the latest. And we only have one additional thing, which I'll show you like on the screen, which is like type safe navigation, which I added on top of that. But everything else is just the fork of auto route that's in my package. And yeah, we use it that way.
All right. Hey, we got some love. Looking for my cursor here. There it is. We got some love in the chat for you, Dane. Learned a lot about Flutter from you.
Hey, Victor. Yeah, I know Victor.
Nice.
We've chatted quite a bit over the years.
Okay, well, my expectations have already been upended in a good way. I didn't know that you were just like, hey, those packages are good. I'm going to use them. So you're orchestrating these things in an original way, or in your way. And yeah, I'm excited to see it. So yeah, whenever you're ready, we can get started.
Okay. I am ready.
All right, your screen is up. And if you could,
Okay.
yeah, nice. You're a step ahead there. Blowing up that text size.
Yeah.
Yeah, that looks
And
pretty
just
good.
another thing too, like who I am, like my claim to fame is that I was on the Fireship channel, which is now a crazy big channel, and I collaborated with him twice, I think, once or twice. And Jeff is actually the guy that um that like I'm like put my name in to become a GDE. So he asked me, "Hey, do you want to be a GDE? I think you should be one." And then he actually started that process for me. So that's kind of my claim to fame, since I'm not the biggest production Flutter focused channel anymore. So like that's my new claim to fame. I used to be on
Is
Fireship.
wow. That is pretty wild. Is he a GDE?
Yes, he's a Fire-based GDE. He wanted me to be a Fire-based GDE as well. I was on his channel to show him how we build our backends in Firebase in a way that is structured and easy to continue scaling and has like fixed places for like your reactive functions, your API endpoints, all these things. And so
Uh,
once he saw that whole setup, he asked if I wanted to be a GDE. I didn't know he was talking about Firebase. So when they reached out and they asked me, what GDE do you want to be? I said Flutter. And then he said, oh, I actually thought you're going to join us for the Firebase GDEs. But yeah, so
some people double dip. So
mm,
you might be able to if you want. But
yeah, yeah.
um, man, that is
It's
quite a claim to fame. Let's check out Stacked here.
yeah. So Stack comes with its own CLI, and that's what we use and recommend because it just beats like
Yep.
stitching all of these things together. So we're just going to do a dot pub global and activate the stack CLI. And yeah, that should be it. And then it has a command to create app. So you're going to do stacked app, and we're just going to do observable Flutter. And so what this will do is use our latest template, and it actually uses the Flutter like CLI underneath of the Flutter like command line tool as well. So we run a normal Flutter run or Flutter create app, and then we replace specific files with what we have in our code. So you'll always have the latest version of the Flutter like create functionality, and then we just add ours on top of that. So it's not a completely custom thing that we built. My belief, which it's a lot similar to what you mentioned at the beginning, is that there's a lot of good technology out there. It's good to acknowledge it. It's good to use it. I don't want to rebuild or reinvent the wheel or do any of that. So I usually try and use what exists. I don't fight against Flutter with Stacked. It's just all about being more productive and then having specifically a testable code base. And that obviously allows us to have a more maintainable code base, at least in our case. And so if I open this guy up, let me just get my setup ready. Like that.
Very wise of you to have the Android emulator ready to go. I once lost an entire episode of Observable Flutter to
Wow.
Android emulator problems.
That is yeah. So is the zoom level fine on the VS Code side? Can you see all the text clearly? Or should I go
Yeah, the
one
file
level?
browser looks good to me, folks. You can say in the chat what you think. Let's see a file as well.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm gonna go over the basics of how like what stacked is, and then just kind of like the layout of how it like this layout of what's set up in here. So you'll see there's quite a few things that we add. I'll just go over the basics of that. So the first thing to mention, which is something that a lot of people don't know, is that Stacked isn't just a state management solution. We use Provider, as I mentioned in the beginning. Stacked is actually what I consider to be a meta framework. So I modeled it after like Next.js, meaning like not specifically in terms of how they generate their routes, but just with everything that they provide. So we have state management, we have our navigation setup, we have a dialogue, a bottom sheets, our snack bars. You can all like generate that through the CLI and kind of add it into your app. So scaffolding in there, and it just like packages like everything together, so it's easy for us to follow through. And so the basic like principle of Stacked is that it's testable, and we have an architecture that we use or a design pattern, which is MVVM. So view, it's model view model. So we just have a view and a view model in our code, and then the models for your data. And that's how we set up everything. So for each view, you'll always see there's a view model with that. And the way that this works is the view model will be like pure Dart code, just classes and like variables, like variables, classes, and there won't be much else in here. You won't see any Flutter code like besides in the view. So the view will be the only place where you'll see code that looks like it belongs in the Flutter like world. Everything else should look like pure Dart code, and that was kind of the goal, because that's the only way we could get the whole code base to be like unit testable in that way, is to make sure that we don't have to start the Flutter engine just to check if the state value has changed. And so we wanted to decouple that. And this is a very basic view model. We just have our values, and we like if you want to like rebuild the UI, we just call rebuild UI, which is actually just an alias for notify listeners. We just like how it looks. It's literally just, if you look at that function, which we can, it just calls notify listeners.
You just rename the function.
yeah. So it's an alias to kind of make it easier to teach. A lot of beginners didn't know what a listener was because they've never worked with listenable values. And so I was like, okay, I can teach that whole thing, or I can make the function easier to understand by just renaming it to something that you can just read out loud.
One quick thing, by the way, next time you're in VS Code, I'd say a click or two bigger on the font yet.
Okay.
Give it a little command plus love.
Like that?
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Okay, perfect. And so you have the home view or the view, and you have your view model. And the only other thing we have is services. And a service is basically just a wrapper for like either your business logic, which I know there's a lot of debates about business logic and business rules and what it is, or your application code, which is usually just like it's technical speak for like wrapping a package and all of its internals. So for instance, like what we'll do later is create an API service, which will be using the HTTP package to make the request, and DC like return that type safe model to us, instead of having that code within our state logic. We just put it in a facade service, which is a known pattern that people use to kind of make the API that you work with as a dev feel clean within the code base. And I'll take you through all of that later. So we have the view model, and the services. Services we'll look at later. But in terms of state management, this is the only two things that you should know about. You'll see that a stacked view is extended from a stacked view. And then you just have a normal build function with the addition that there's a view model that's given to you.
Okay.
And so what happens when you call rebuild UI is that now that your state's updated, say the counter goes to 1, you call rebuild UI. You now get your view model through this builder, and you can then rebuild your UI with the new state. And so that's literally the only mechanism that we have for state management. And we've been able to build everything that we needed because it's like such a basic version of things. And then we have this little override, which is where we create the view model itself. So I'll stop there if you have any questions, or if the chat has any questions.
I did Well, there's one that I'm going to get back to way later. I've saved it for the end.
Hmm.
Let's see. Here's one. I actually didn't catch this line of code. Miguel is asking, why do you show dialogue from the view model?
Hmm.
Yeah, that is quite a good
So,
question.
yeah, I agree. So I actually get that quite a lot. Um, and the reason for the specific way that we are doing things, and we do it with our navigation as well. So um,
Oh, it's
you can
observable.
import the navigation service, and then you can do you can navigate from the view model. And the main reason for this is, like I said, we write tests. I know if some of like the FilledStacks guys are in the chat group, it's a requirement that your feature is submitted with unit test that covers just the basics like assumptions, states, like conditional branching, and then the interactions or things you want from the system as well. And so if I, for instance, state something like um, in this app, we want the user of the app to be able to check out, but only if they are logged in. Like all of that sounds just like business logic, and I would want that in the same function. So, like how that would look for us in the view model is we'll check the authentication service if the user is logged in. If they are not logged in, we want to show a dialog, and I want to be able to unit test that specific scenario as well. And so then I'll call my dialog service here, and it will go back to a Flutter specific space and show it in there. So it doesn't do anything. It just like redirects through and gets to
Hmm.
where like Flutter is in control and then shows it. And so the only reason we did these abstractions is because those business rules we actually want a unit test. And it was the only way
Hmm.
that we found that we could do it, because if we kept it outside of this, we would need Flutter to be running just to check that simple like business rule in a like unit test. So for instance, if I just quickly, I know a lot of people don't like tests, so I'm going to do this quite quickly. If we create a group, and it's like we're just going to call it checkout, and the function is on this side. Um, let's do checkout. If I do something where it's like, now I'm just going to keep it like that, and I wanted to check that this is actually what's happening. If I didn't have the abstraction for the dialog service, then I wouldn't be able to say when called, we should show dialog. And so now in this case, if I do model get model, um, and then I call checkout, it's taking a bit, can't believe my fingers feel so tight. I guess it's the nerves as I'm
You're
typing.
actually doing great. You're doing great.
um, So now if I wanted to verify, what I would do is I would check my dialog service. This will get a mock of my dialog
Yeah.
service. All of this is built into Stacked. Um, and say, like now I want to check if we did call show dialog with a specific title and with the specific name or whatever the thing is. If we didn't have the abstraction, I wouldn't be able to unit test that rule. And I'm saying unit test because I could integration test it by running the Flutter framework
Yep.
first
Yep.
and then doing the dialog call and then like checking that it works. But specifically to unit test it, you need to not be dependent on Flutter or like anything else besides Dart to just be running.
Yeah.
So
Th-
yeah,
it's a pretty interesting idea. I don't think I've really ever heard anyone else approach it this way. Maybe maybe others are, maybe many others are. But
yeah,
to your point here, you take to make code unit testable, kind of anytime you leave something that's under your complete control. So if you're accessing the file system, if you're using Firebase, if you're
yeah,
using local storage, then it's you really can't write a test for that unless you completely encapsulate it, which is what you're talking about here.
yeah,
But you're treating Flutter itself in that way. And part of the trick here is that dialogues in Flutter are actually imperative and not declarative. And so that means you just have to call a method, and you can't as easily read your state and just determine that you show the dialogue. You have to have
Yeah.
called the show dialogue method on the build context. And so you're
Mm.
even treating Flutter itself as this entity, this basically third party in your code base that has to be abstracted away, you at least for the purpose of dialogues, maybe a couple other things as well. That's
Yeah.
super interesting.
Yeah. So when I started my professional career as a programmer, so this was like directly after university, I started as a Windows Phone dev. I don't know if you've ever worked with Windows Phone, which is like C# based. And
Wow.
I worked in that for like a few months, and then I moved over to the cross-platform games team in that company, which was like C++ and Cocos 2DX, and that's kind of where I fell in love with cross-platform work. I didn't want to go back to mobile development and use something that wasn't cross-platform. But to get back to the C# part, we had a mandatory like TDD course we had to attend, a workshop, and at the time I didn't like writing tests at all. And the instructor, to his credit, broke down every single belief I had about being slower, like as I write tests and do these things, and the fact that I could somehow, like I used to think, just know exactly that this is working perfectly, and I'm going to run my code, and then it turns out that it doesn't work perfectly. So since that time, which was in 2013, I think, I've been practicing TDD straight through, and like at the core, it would be like whatever you can't control, and Flutter is something that I don't have complete control of, like you mentioned. It's not that I'm trying to abstract Flutter, it's just that um, there's this rule that like whatever you don't own, you can assume that it's 100% unit tested. It might be
Mm-hmm.
flawed, but that's
Mm-hmm.
just to keep your unit tests nice and small, and you don't, like, you're not testing that if I construct a class, the class exists, or if I like try and do a nullable string, that it's actually, like, you don't test anything with Dart. And I didn't want to
Mm-hmm.
test anything within Flutter. So if Flutter had a bug, I didn't want my code to be affected, or my unit test at least to be affected by it. So
Yep.
it gives you this like safety net to say, hey, I can prove to you that like all my code works. If there's a bug in this thing, it has to be Flutter, or it has to be this other thing that's causing that bug. And so what I wanted to do is just say, okay, how can I assume that Flutter is 100% unit tested, and I only have to check that I called the function that I need to call for Flutter to do its job. And so I like ended up
Yep.
with these abstracted services that just use a very basic it's like a basic setup to get back to Flutter. I actually have videos about how I built the entire stack, and that's when I like wrapped it as a package, because I just
Mm.
showed everyone this is what I do. And a lot of people were like, I'm not going to spend this much time setting up all the stuff. And so I was like, oh
Oh,
yeah,
right.
um,
Right.
yeah.
So one
But
one quick comment from chat here, and it's exactly what we're just talking about. I think you've largely just addressed it, but it is, I think, worth kind of hanging on for a second. Miguel again says,
mhm.
I love testing, but I feel like you're mixing unit testing with UI testing. If showing the dialog fails because of a Flutter related issue, your test won't catch this. And
Mm,
is exactly what you were just talking about. So you're making the intentional decision to not catch it. And,
yeah,
you know, but if showing a dialogue in Flutter proves to be buggy enough, or, under enough regressions that you need to test it, of course, you can add an additional uh,
yeah,
UI test, like a widget test, to make sure that the
yes,
widget is actually there.
yeah.
But yeah, that's I haven't really ever thought about it this way before, but I think it also makes quite a bit of sense.
Mm. Yeah, so that's exactly right. We also have an integration testing setup, which allows you to, it's not headless Flutter, it's still running Flutter, but you just have a single screen up, and you can like use all these services and check that everything works. And then we also pair that with like full end-to-end UI test. I never actually do like UI unit tests. It's something that I've chosen not to go into. And that's just because I don't want to test Flutter itself, because I kind of just go with the theory that whatever you don't control, you should assume is fully covered with its own unit tests. But yeah,
and
that's
certainly,
a good answer from Miguel, or a counterpoint, and I chose to do it that way intentionally.
And if you find, even of course, nothing is actually 100% unit tested, but Flutter takes regressions very seriously.
Yeah, I've
So
seen.
if there is a problem with something like show dialog, that'll be like, goodness, a p -1. That'll be fixed very quickly.
yeah, I can imagine.
All right. So what's next?
Okay. Yeah, so basically what I wanted to show is just what you would usually have to do when you are building an app. So like, we're going to fetch something from like an API, we're going to list that, and then we're just going to add a form to kind of filter that list. That's if we can get through everything, like with the questions, but that's kind of the basis of what I want to like go through. And so I don't know if you, yeah, so I explained like the state management, and so like the next thing would just be how you actually create these services, use it, and then kind of build up your app from that point, and then just show some like navigation and the form functionality, just a bunch of those things.
Sounds
Is
great.
that what
Let's do it.
Okay, awesome. So so what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Google API, and then we're just going to go to the books v1, and we're going to get some data over there. I have the response, but if I swap over to the other screen, it's going to do the whole duplicate thing now. But so I'll show you guys that when I get there. So basically, there's three things that we have to do to implement this feature, which is getting books and showing it. There's the UI part, which I don't want to spend time on. There's a lot of good UI videos out there for Flutter. Then there's our state part, which I want to show, which is our view model. And then there's building the actual service, which will get that data and then return it to us. So I'd like to start at this end, where we first make sure that we're getting the data and serializing that properly, and then returning that to our view model, where I can then show you the extreme amount of code you have to write, which is only 2 lines of code, to get that into your view model and showing in your UI as well. So yeah, we'll start with service. So like everything else, Stack CLI has the command to create the service. And so if I go to my API service, it's just a class. And with that class, as I've mentioned, they all come with their own like unit testing file that sets up any of the other services you might want to use, or anything else that's required will get set up, so you can just immediately start writing your code. We are going to use, given that I am a very old school Flutter dev, I've been using the HTTP package even after Dio came out, even after responses, all these other packages. I was like, diehard HTTP.
I like the HTTP package as well, to be honest.
Yeah,
I
doesn't have all
wrap that in my own abstraction.
Oh, nice. I have not done that. I just go directly HTTP package.
Yeah, I like to, well, while you're typing this in, I like to wrap my network request sender, and then I, abstract the idea of a request and abstract the idea of a response. And then again, it's all in the service of having an easy test writing experience, because then you can have a fake that just says like, I don't care what request you give me, I'm returning this response, and then make sure everything uses that response correctly.
So like the reason we do the API as a service is specifically for that reason, but I don't test like at the level of the service. So we do have some of our apps where we do the wrapper for the actual like HTTP, but in this case, I obviously don't want to go too deep and like set it up in the way that it'll take much longer to do. So we're going to do Google APIs.com, and actually I don't know how other devs do this. I've seen someone create all their strings in their own class with static fields that they can access later on. So like their configuration. I don't know if you have a specific way that you save your base URL, for instance, just to
Yeah, I don't
kind
think I
of,
have anything more clever than this. I mean, I do use the URI class
yeah,
everywhere, especially now that I think it was like a year or two ago, or 2 years ago, that the HTTP class switched from taking strings to URIs, if I'm remembering this correctly.
yeah.
Did that happen? Was that a moment in time? Was that a thing?
Yeah, so there was a time where a lot of my URI usage broke, and I do remember that clearly. So what we're going to do is just create a function called getBooks that returns a list of books. We're still going to make that model. I'm going to use freeze to do that. So for this for this function, I'd like us to be able to pass in something that we can change. So for now, we'll just do the default as the computer books, because I assume all of us are using computers on this call. Yeah, so I'm just gonna, so in TDD fashion, for instance, this would be a failing test because it's not compiling. And so I'm just gonna go through and add Flutter. I'm just gonna create that model, which would be freezed annotation that goes into normal, and then freezed goes as the dev package. Then JSON annotation goes normal, and dev we have JSON serializable. If I type that
Nice.
correctly. Yeah, okay, cool. And then we usually create right over here in the lib folder. I'll just have a folder called models, and in the models folder, we'll just do book dot dot. Then I have a few snippets which allows me to cheat in cases like this, where I can just go freeze JS. And for this model, we basically, so they return to you the title, the authors, the descriptions, and a collection of images called the image links. And so for this model, I'm just going to quickly run through that. This will be a list string authors. We'll have a string description.
Long word. Long word.
And then there's another class, image links, which just, so I'm going to put it in a different file as well. So we'll do image links because it's not that big and don't have such a big code base that I have to be concerned with a number of files. So image links, it returns a small thumbnail and a thumbnail. So small thumbnail. And if they actually, if anyone wants to go to this URL, there's a little bit of a query you can add with it, and you'll see the whole structure that I'm going through here. So I just loaded that up before so we could not get stuck on like what to deserialize and how to do it. And then Stack has another nice like alias for the build runner command, which is called generate. And you'll see if you look at the bottom there, it'll just do dot run build runner build and do that for us. So while that's getting generated, I can't see the chat. If anyone on the stream is wondering, it's only Craig that can see the chat, so he has to feed me questions or anything.
We've been clarifying a few questions, but I don't think anything that has warranted disrupting your progress yet.
Okay.
Other than the times that I did.
It's good. So there was a error. I didn't import image links, and so the generate failed. Okay, so that that all passed, and we can import the model. Can I ask you a question? When you import local files, do you use relative imports,
Mm.
or do you use like package
I think
file?
I think most folks go relative, and I am just not on that train.
Me too. I'm so
I,
happy you said that. I was gonna say it just feels it doesn't look nice, and sometimes I know it's
yeah.
the CPU doesn't know the difference, but it just doesn't feel nice seeing all the dots
Yep.
at the top.
Yep. And I
Yeah.
know if I move a file, either the IDE is going to adjust the imports for me or it's not. It's the same either way. I like the look of package import, even though I'm importing my own package.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just gonna construct the URI request. So the third parameter is the query, and the way that Google Books work is you give it a query which requires a subject, and our subject will be the genre type that we've added. So that
And so
gives
this
us our,
string, this subject colon, this is just the specific syntax of the Google API's
yes, yeah.
API.
So that's how they want you to query that. So if we go response, now we can use the trusted. I'm happy I found someone else that's also still using the HTTP package, and we can
Yeah.
get that
You and I have a
response,
few
and
things
then
in common there.
yeah, and we can serialize this. So JSON decode is in the dot convert package, and then this is kind of the only place where you'll have to know the structure of the
Yep. What the API sends back.
yeah. So JSON body. Why is that iterable items JSON not
Yeah.
encode? And so
Right.
when you get the request from the volumes back with the compute, you get like metadata, so like the book count, the type, and then you get a list of items, and the items are not the books itself, but also it's metadata of the books. You'll get the page count, you'll get the publisher, all of those things. And what we actually want, which is within that list, is if we map through, we can do book from JSON, and within the items list, like I said, they'll have like the metadata, but within there, what they call the book is the volume. So the volume information
Mm-hmm.
has all the book details, the title, and all of these additional stuff. So we're going to do volume info, and we're just going to set that to list. And so that's our first service. That'll probably be our only service on this stream. This will go out, get the data, come back, then give us a list of books. And
So how
so
do you
now
think
we
about
can.
testing this code, by the way? We're talking about highly testable stuff.
Yeah. So usually, so like you said, at this point over here, I can wrap, like you said, you have a wrapper for that, which then have your own like version of the response and request. At this point there, like if I wanted to go that deep, which I didn't want to do on the stream because I wanted to get through quite a bit of things, but we would just introduce our own service, which will
Yeah.
be our HTTP service, which we have
Yep.
like in all our like code bases, we have an HTTP service which does the pure get and like all of those things, and like handle some things, like it looks at the
Mm-hmm.
response codes and like tells us, oh, you have to refresh or you have to redirect in a more
Yeah.
clear
Okay.
way.
Nice.
But then we could simply unit test this and
Yep.
swap out our responses. We can throw exceptions, we can check all that. So this is a hard dependency in this specific implementation, but we can swap that out quite easily because
Yeah. Makes
it's
sense.
only this like this line really. And then in some cases, people swap out their serializer in case they don't want to use JSON decode and they want to use something else.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some very long debates with a few with a few developers
Yeah.
about how
And
deep
folks,
you should go.
right. Swap out the the hardware, swap out the operating system. So Randall in the chat's also saying, and I think this is potentially interesting, even though I don't want to get too bogged down in this. He's pointing out that JSON decode can return anything. It's not guaranteed to be an iterable, but
Yeah.
I think, essentially you would have to check. Like you're basically saying, you know what? If the API is down, then this ain't gonna work. And for a real app, you'd test it better and you'd raise an error that says the API is down, right? So because right now, if the API returns sorry broken as a string, like this is gonna fail.
Yeah. So I have a note in my notes that says like defensive code comments will come through. So I will usually I don't do this, Randall. I promise I can pull up some of our other code bases. I don't assume the structure and all these things. We have a bunch of checks we go through to ensure that
we're on a
everything's good. And then
2-hour
we have our
clock
own
here, so
yeah. And then we have our own like custom exceptions usually, and then we test for that specifically. And any exception that's not that, we'll make a fatal crash warning and send that up so we can kind of know what's happening. And so we do all of those things. But I do agree, and I was thinking, like, even when I sent you some of the things I wanted to go through, I was thinking like how deep should I go? Should I do TDD on this thing? It's gonna take us like yeah. So
tough.
I agree.
Gotta draw the line somewhere.
Randall. Yeah. So now we have that part down the line done, which is the code that actually fetches the information and gives it to us, serializes that, and then returns that back to us. So what we want for our app state is we want to call this function, get that data, store it locally, and then show that in our UI. And Stack actually has a built-in way that we do this. So this is just an abstraction on top of this base view model, but it's called a future view model. And you can type it for book. And once you complete that, it will complain that there is no future to run. I did not, like, English is not my first language, but this made the most sense to me. So if it is a weird name, I apologize. Please provide me a better one.
No, I think it's fine.
Yeah, and so this will be the first time that we're going to start using the service locator, which is just a getted locator. So if I go API service equals locator, API service, that'll be available. And to actually use this, all we have to do is call get books, and that would be our entire state class, because future view model does a few things for us. It has a data property, which is type and type safe. It has an error property, which if an exception is thrown, it will call the function on error. If you want to handle additional things in there. If the data is returned, if you just want to check that the data comes back and like you want to do something else, there's an on data property. And then there's a on future error, on error. Was another one, I think we removed it. Yeah. Oh no, that's on the stream one where we could transform the stream before we store it as the data. But that's we're not using the stream in this one. It's just a future view model. And so just to go into some of the depths of what this does, excuse me, we have a specific function that is like run busy future, which is also available in the base view model. And what this does is it sets a property to busy for the view model. It runs the future, and then it sets that property back to false. And in between all of that, it will catch the error, set the message if there's an error message or anything you want to do. And so this leaves the state nice and clean. And so when we go over to the home view, if we simply want to, let's just quickly do this. That's the wrong key. Here we go. If we do that, I think I've deleted too many.
Well, this is always my favorite part.
So if we, I think I still have deleted it. There we go. If we
Unknowable.
do, so now that we have this, like we know that it's going to call the busy state and everything in Stack, the functionality for Stacked is fully unit tested. The tests are there and it's also integration tested end to end. Only parts that's currently failing is because of our fork of auto route. Some of our unit tests are failing in our generator, but it's still fully end-to-end tested. So we know if we break something, like our generator will be running our CI and in our CD pipeline, and that will tell us, hey, something has broken, and it's not backwards compatible anymore. So we have this busy property. So on the view model, there's going to be an is busy property because it's now a future view model, and we'll do center, and I'll just put a circular this indicator. Let me remove the center because that'll be pretty weird. Let's remove. Oh, I thought it would pop up, but it didn't. Circular progress indicator. And if it is not, I use a boulder context index, and we'll fold that out. Now I just want to show basics. And so because of this massive amount of code over there, we get all this nice functionalities that we usually need in our views, and that's kind of how we built Stacked. Whenever we would get in a client in our agency, we would assess what they need, and we were like, oh, like everyone needs the same things. And there's something that I skipped early, which I want to get back to at the end as well, which is just some general behavior around how the app works that we also account for with Stacked. And so now we have the item count, and because your future can throw a like an exception, the model property is actually never gonna be
Give
like
you up,
guaranteed to not be
let
null.
you down.
And so we have this dot length works with the item count. So I'm just going to use a list tile for now, and we'll just do title. And so the
I know
way I
we're
like
not
to
doing a ton of UI, but if you just wrap it in a card, it'll look so much better.
yeah, you are right. We will use a card. Okay, I will definitely do that. So I just want to get the first item in there, and then saying if I use a card, if I wrap the list tile in a card as well, like that. Yeah. And then I'm just going to put in book title. Why is it complaining?
I forget, when did we turn the data into book objects?
So we did that in the API service. So
book.from JSON. It's just literally.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What's that? And then we just get it typed anyway, so we don't have to do much.
Now, I do have a couple questions about this code here, and there's one good one from the chat. Miguel is just there's a eternal fountain of good questions. And Miguel writes, does this view model hold on to the previous value while loading? Because sometimes you want to keep showing the previous value.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
Nice. And where would we access that? I guess it's probably documented.
Yeah, so so everything is stored in this. It will not be replaced until the new value is in. So that app, so we actually used to clear that, and that question that Miguel had came up, which is we would clear it because we would want the freshest data in there. But what happened is if you get an exception, you would not have your old data anymore. So instead of storing a previous value, we just did not replace the data value until we get a successful return of the data, and so you can always have it and show it until the new one comes.
So how does
And
this interact with the is busy attribute?
so in the
Because what
view
I'm
model,
imagining here, I think Miguel is getting at, let's say I have a search and then I start another search. So now I'm busy, right?
yeah,
But I also have old data and I want to keep showing that old data, even though is busy is probably true because I'm loading again.
yeah. So there's a like what we're doing on this side is we're completely hiding the data when it's like we're just like not showing anything.
Okay.
But the way that I would like approach that is, instead of completely hiding everything, if data so there's a property called like data ready. So only the first time that the data is not ready, I will show the like circular indicator, and that will never not be true after the first set of data has been fetched. And so you
Okay.
can then use that in combination with your is busy to decide if you want to show like
Got it.
skeleton loading or like shimmering on top of the old data instead of nothing. Like you
Yep.
could do
Yep.
all of those additional things. So there's a few properties that I'm going to skip over, but these questions are very good, Miguel. I would like for you to ask more questions because it allows me to kind of go through stuff that I might skip over and I might take for granted myself. So okay, I'm just gonna add this in so we can at least see something on the emulator. This is nullable. So I'm just going to run this so that we can at least see something on screen before we hit the hour mark, because something running in the emulator.
That seems like a good idea.
And
So
so
it's
what you'll
interesting. Oh, I see. I was wondering about leaving book nullable on line 26, but because the index is there based on the item count situation,
yeah,
but data itself could be null.
yeah.
Interesting.
So you'll see the stacked loading indicator, and I just want to quickly cover that. So there we go. We have the definitive guide to DEX, blockchain, Bitcoin, the pragmatic programmer, which is obviously a very nice book to read. But you saw if I just restarted, you would see the stacked like loading
Yep.
indicator there, and we identified that usually when you have these apps that are in production, you usually have sessions locally and all these things, and you want to always run some startup logic. And so we have the startup view at the beginning of everything. Currently, we're just delaying it by 3 seconds to show, like when you generate it, like, hey, this is where you can make decisions. And so what we have here, and I actually have a full video on my channel, I think it's called A Practical Guide to Unit Testing in Flutter, where I use TDD to actually write the startup logic for one of our login sequences that we have for our clients, where we have to check if they logged in, then we check if the cart is there, then we have to confirm that the items in the cart is still available in the cart, then we have to check so all these things. And I do that without launching the app once, and then when I run the app, everything works because of my amazing TDD skills that I have. And yeah, so this is just something that we've identified. And so every stack project will have a startup view and a startup view model. You can modify the view with just normal widget code. It shows immediately after the splash screen, and that's kind of what you see when we showed the little stack loading view over there. So this now completes using a service, getting data, storing that data, catching it, handling the exceptions. If you get like any of that stuff, we could have it in there. You'll get the exceptions, it'll be stored, you can show it, you can have like your UI pop up. Nothing will break on your UI. You are in control of showing it in here. So like this property will also have the has error property, and we can get that error and then show it however we want to do it. It'll store the exception. We are planning to write a like something to make the exception handling and getting the data out of it easier. So a way for you to map whatever the exception string or object is to your own model and then kind of show it like easily in your app. We don't have that map, but in the onError function, you get the full exception, and so you can still do that like at that point and like extract the messages you want and figure out what you want to do next. Yeah, and so the next thing would be just tapping on one of these items and heading over to the details for that item. So if there's no other questions, we can march forward.
Let's see. I just answered one question. Someone asked if the splash screen was customizable, and I was wagering that that was a bunch of generated code that we saw, and someone can just replace it with the widget tree.
So yeah, so the one with the loading is just a Flutter widget, and then I don't think we have a full splash. Yeah, so that's just the startup view that's showing, and if I head over to that, it is a widget with stacked loading, and you can do whatever you want. I actually have a video where we set up a flare splash screen. So not flare, it's called Rive now. So a Rive splash screen where it would load that and you would loop until you're ready. I also have one with the Lottie animations that's on my channel because we had to do both. So I had some clients that had a bunch of Lottie animations and they wanted that as their splash screen. And so I have a video walking through that as well on my channel. So this is, nice. Yeah, it's quite customizable. And so the next thing that we want to do is basically just create like a book details view. And then when we tap on one of these, we navigate there. And that would just be to show you how the navigation works, show the type safe functionality of it. And yeah, I guess that will take us probably to the end of the session, but I would like to show that part.
Yeah, sounds good. There's a UI question that I think is interesting. Let's scroll up and find it. Does Stack support re-render of a specific part of the widget tree rather than the whole widget tree when spot in your state changes?
Yeah, so because this is like if you look at the view, we use stacked views down to the widget level as well. And so if that changes, so for instance, if we had to build into this like a search bar, which we will, but not in this way, we could, if it's a very state heavy search bar that might change on its own without the main view, we would give it its own view model and have it run its own thing. So when that like rebuilds, the rest of the UI stays the same. We have that, and we also have the option to only rebuild if a specific property changes, which just comes from the provider package. There's like a selector in there, which we just kind of give a like API for in here, and you can just use that selector to say only if this property changes do I want this view model to rebuild. And so there's another concept here which I'm not. Let me show. I can't think of an example to kind of show it, but you could make a widget that inherits the parent's like view model. So you don't have to keep like creating your own view models, and within that view, you would be able to rebuild the smaller widget only if a specific property of the parent has changed. So say you make a widget and you want to listen to a specific property. You would you would say, hey, this is the parent view model. It's called home view model. I only want it to change if the offline state or whatever has changed. I want this specific widget to rebuild. And yeah, so there's ways to do it. It's all in the docs on the official Stack docs. It's in there, and then we are busy. Hopefully me and Fernando can actually find some time to write. We've built so many other example apps that we want to put in, but we just don't find the time to put it in our official docs. Yeah, but to answer the question, yes, there is a way to do that. It's built in and accounted for in Stack. So just reach out, Twitter or wherever. I will
Mhm.
send you the code. If you are going to use Stack, you can always contact me and I'll try and help.
Yeah, I would summarize that as a view model doesn't have to be the whole page.
Yes.
And so that's one obvious way to do it. But
Yeah.
that could be annoying if it was like 10 of them on a page. And so there you also surface the existing provider API to use the selector. It can
Yeah.
all be one page. You still selectively re-render.
Yes. So if you want each one of these cards to actually have like access to the home view model, you can do that as well by moving this into its own file and then like inheriting the like this home view model. And then that card you can say, I only want to change if this value changes. And so even if the rest of the view model rebuilds, it might not rebuild, or you can allow that. Or you can say like, hey, I don't care if like if the parent like rebuilds, I want to stay the same, and it will only rebuild once you say, okay, this property has changed. Let me rebuild myself. Yeah, we used to have it only full view and widget, so you'd have to create a like a new view model to ensure that that part doesn't rebuild, which we still do a lot for specific things, especially if it's like one page but with sections of things, so like swipeable docs or banners. Can't
Mm-hmm.
come up with so many situations. I can't think of it now, but yeah, we've encountered all of those, and we've made sure that they are fully addressed and stacked.
Sounds good. Yeah, and folks, if you are curious about like the cost of re-rendering and different scenarios and whatnot, we'll self-plug my talk on the life cycle of a render object in Paris. Paris Connection, I think the event was called. Um, demystifies a lot of that.
Nice. Yeah, I think did I watch it? I did. I think I did. Yeah,
Seems
yeah.
to have really left an impression on you.
No. I'm just thinking back. I watch so many Flutter talks. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Well, okay, not
Um,
required viewing. So
are, are we moving? Are we moving forward? Are we gonna?
yeah, let's do it.
Oh, okay. So this is just how we create a new view. I'm gonna say details, and I'm gonna stop this. And so that will be created as a view, the same view that we had earlier. And so I want to kind of show the type safe navigation. So I'm gonna do just as an example, if I had to pass in the book that we wanted to view, and I left this as not required, so a nullable, and actually this weird thing that we're trying to figure out, which is when the build runner stops running, our CLI doesn't exit for like 2 or 3 seconds, which we haven't really figured out yet. But yeah, don't want to expose all the issues we have that people are like, hey, your CLI waits 2 seconds after.
There's that
We'll
darn
figure it out.
sleep 2 left in there somewhere. It's a test from day one.
So I'm going to do a future, and I'm going to call this navigate to book. And for now, we'll just do a nullable book. And this will be from the home view model. And like I said, we have a bunch of services that we have abstracted for the case we spoke about at the beginning. One of that is also the navigation service, and that's a wrapper around Flutter Navigator, and how that works. So you'll see that after we've generated book details view, now we can go and say navigation service, and it's going to say we can go navigate to book details view. And you'll see that it's not complaining about anything, but if I had to go and make this required, if we do a stacked generate, it will eventually complain and say, hey, this is a required parameter. And we wanted that functionality specifically because of the amount of errors that we would face if we, without that before, we would just get errors where devs would change the things and there would be nothing telling us that the code broke. And yeah, so we worked on type safety, which I know now I think almost all of the navigation packages have it. I think Go Router definitely has type safe and navigation.
Yeah, through
Or
the Go
some,
Router builder extension.
yeah. And so so now we just need to pass in our book, which at this point will actually be and this is kind of everything you need for the navigation. But I just wanted to add something on screen here so that, and then we can get back to that. I just want to do book dot description. And I'll just say no description in case there's nothing. Yeah, so back over here, that is the functionality required to, from this point, if tapped, head over to the book details view. And all we have to do at this point is on tap, we want to call view model dot navigate to book, and then we'll pass in that book. I'm believing in the code at this point, and I'm like, hey, this is you are going to be a real book by the time I get to this point. And
You're a real book is very funny.
Yeah.
You're a real book.
So we have our mandatory 3-second wait and loading.
Yep.
And if I tap on this now, it shows us a nice blue view with our description. And that's, I mean, that's the majority of what I wanted to go through. The other thing I wanted to show off is the form functionality that we have in Stacked, which is also accounted for with two-way binding with the form, so you don't have to add a lot of code to get your controller values into the view model. And if you want to bring it back to the UI, you just set it in the view model and we automatically figure that out.
Nice.
And
I'd love
put
to
it in
see
your
that.
UI.
It feels like we were saying, a form, right now you're just searching computers. A form to dynamically search different queries for books seems a good thing to explore.
Okay, we could do that. Oh, I wanted to actually filter the books, but we can definitely do.
If you have a different plan, stick with your plan.
No, I'm just thinking we could do just a button on screen, and when tapped, we rerun our future, pass in the new value, and that should work.
Oh, you're talking about submitting. Yeah, I mean, I think seeing the connection of that form to the API service, kind of bringing it all together, that'd be pretty good.
And do you think so? There's that one, or we could filter the list, but I mean, there's only 7 books. It's not. Yeah, you're right. Let's do the connection to the form. And so, yeah, so it starts with an annotation where we tell Stack like, hey, this is a form view. And we have a few different fields. We were very ambitious at the beginning with our date field and our drop-down fields. We've since found that everyone only uses the form field, so we are most likely going to start deprecating the other ones. It just allows you to have a list that automatically binds with your drop-down selector, and but that is not a feature we want to keep holding on to, since literally no one that we asked is using it. And yeah, okay.
Yeah,
So
somehow I've almost done no forms work in Flutter. Like basically never build forms other than login stuff.
yeah, we built a an app for oil field company based in Texas, and they had these safety issues that would happen with some of the people, and because the guys working there, I mean, this is the CEO's words, they feel very macho and they don't want to complain about being hurt or getting hurt. They never told anyone, and so he actually went to dinner with one of the guys and found out from his wife that he's been suffering with this pain that he like picked up on the field, and so he wanted to build this anonymized like safety reporting issue like app. And so with that, we had to build, it was just like an anonymous app where you could fill in all these forms, the field location, where it happened, what caused it, what could be done to fix it, all these things. And so they built this like lessons learned app. And when I was doing that, I had to painfully build, have all these controllers. Like some of the forms had like 21 fields. It was like the guys will just go through, they don't want to do multiple views. We had this whole discussion about the UX. And so in that time, I was actually thinking about this functionality, which that app forced me to build this
Figure
after
out.
that. And then we transitioned the app to use this functionality as well. So
And I have to say, this sounds also just like a workers' rights nightmare. What was this situation where
yeah.
people were getting injured and couldn't tell anyone?
Yeah.
What's
So
going on?
I think well they have this daily reporting meeting, but for some reason, well, he said they just didn't want. None of them wanted to say, "Hey, I've been hurt or I've been injured." Or I mean, I'm not there. I've never worked on a oil field rig. I don't know what the mentality is or the mindset. So
Yeah.
um,
Well,
he,
that's
he
not
he
your
actually
problem to solve, but ooh,
yeah.
geez.
But they did get like a lot of the like incidents down, because every day they would open the app and they had this
Mm,
like random like bring up an incident from the last few weeks, and they would read through it and then like discuss like, hey, we need to be wearing this or doing that, make sure that if you see someone
increase
going there.
safety. Yeah.
Yes. And so we did bring it down, which like decreased the insurance cost, which is actually the solution he wanted to sell to other fields, to say, hey, you can decrease your insurance cost by having this protocol in place. And I don't know
Gotcha.
why I'm talking about a client's business, but that's the app that made me, because we had to build uh, a lot of forms, and then we had to white label that app and build more forms. And
Gotcha.
so
You're a forms wizard. That's the takeaway here. That's the
no,
takeaway.
no. So we built this into Stack so that we don't have to experience that pain again. So it starts with an annotation where you just give it the name of the thing that it will be capturing, the text. So that will be, let's do search term. Um, and yeah, let me just generate basics and we can go through all of that. So what the forms do is it enables two-way binding between the view and the view model without you having to access the controller to get the values at any point. We'll do all of that for you. We'll update the view model as you type. We have validations, we have validators, which can be added in here. So it's just a string function that will validate the value and then give it back to you. We can write that if you want to. We have an initial value that will be built into the controller if you want to set it up that way. But what happens is we generate, let's see we generate this mixin for you, which will have the controllers in a map so that we can do some other
Mm,
cool things as well. But just a
yep.
bunch of things, search, and then yeah, just a bunch of syncing things, and all of this code would have had to be in your view file or in the view model file if we didn't have all of this in there. So we then have to call. Okay, and this brings us to another thing. So if you, for instance, wanted to call a function as soon as your view model is constructed. We have this function called onViewModelReady, where you get your view model that's just been constructed, and now you can do what you need to do with it. So in our case, we just need to call sync form with view model and pass in that view model. And it's actually we yeah, so this is not working at the moment because this is still not a view model. So what we usually do is we go with form state helper. And the only reason we do that is because we also have a future view model. But if you weren't in a future view model and you just had a view that was just a pure form, you would instead be using form view model like that. So the only reason we're doing that is because we have the future view model. So we've abstracted all of our like special view models into mixins, which you can just add on to it. So for instance, we have one for the bottom navigation, which is a simple like index tracking view model. It has like 4 lines of code in it, but it makes it easier to not have to track with your own state what page is being shown in your bottom navigation and all of those things. We have streams, we have a multiple future view model, which is you give it a list of futures to run, and each of them will have its own busy state. So it'll fire off, and you'll have busy states for each of them, and so you can do a bunch of things with that. And so that is all the functionality needed to sync. So all we need to do is expose my UI building skills. Now I'm gonna do. Can I do column and an input, and the list view will just expand fully if I make the column max?
But you might have to wrap the input in like a, what's that one? Expanded.
No.
Flexible. But yeah, I think input. I know input in a row is often a headache. But I don't remember if it has issues in a column. Might be fine.
See?
Oh, Miguel, not shrink wrap. Miguel's saying you can do shrink wrap for the list view. And honestly, that's totally fine for a short list view.
I think there's a see.
So for folks who don't know, shrink wrap says, all right, Mr. List View or Mrs. List View, render everything up front, and then that will resolve questions about how tall you are. So the issue comes if you have, because a list view wants to be infinitely tall because it can have an infinite amount of descendant widgets. And a column has an infinite inner height. And so if you have an infinitely tall thing and an infinitely inner height thing, it just gets confusing. Like, what do we show? Where is anything? So list view says, quit being so dynamic, or sorry, shrink wrap says, quit being so dynamic, Mr. List View, or again, Mrs. List View. Just lay out all of your descendant widgets, figure out how tall you are, and then we don't have 2 infinities. We just have the inner height of the, sorry, columns don't necessarily have an inner height. They have inner height of their parent. But now you get rid of that infinity from the list view, and things can start to render better. The issue comes with the fact that a list view can have a crazy amount of descendants. If you know that you only have a few, then it's totally fine. But if you're actually like paginating over data from your back end, then that can be wonky. If you're throwing a form, probably fine.
Yeah. Okay, so we have search term, and so now I just added this text field, which I hope will work.
Me too.
And so we get a search term controller, which is generated for us, and we just pass that in there. And this now will automatically update in the home view model like a bunch of other things. So we'll go through the properties that we have now when we start to use it. I just want to double check that this works because we had a little bug which we required to extend the form view model as well, because of this happened when the like as the type safeness of Dart became stronger with a null safety, there's
Mm.
certain things we couldn't do, and then so we never fully addressed it. But I think there was a PR made today by Fernando, and it's merged and released. So I might just have to update my package if this doesn't work. So let's do that. Fernando, by the way, is the guy that works with me in FilledStacks and helps me build all these things.
It would
So
be
let's.
ridiculous to build it all by yourself.
Yeah, he looks like everything is working. I/flutter. Yeah, I would have outputs over there. Nope. Okay, so we have a form field at the top, and type in not my name, definitive, or whatever the category is, we want to get that in our view model. And so now I want to show off some of that functionality. So we'll just have a function in here. Then the future, that will be fetch new category. And we don't have to pass any values from the controller this way. You can still do that, but we kind of sync everything to this view model as you type it, and we expose a few properties with that. So if I import the home view form, your properties like search term value, which will be the value that's in the controller. And so this is actually a two-way value. So if you assign something to it, it will show up in that form field, like in that text field. And if you just want to read it, you can read that. We have has search term. So if it's null or still empty, this will be false. We have has search term validation message. So that is if you have passed in a validator in here, it will show up in that, and it will all update as you type. So if you want to intercept at that point anything, there's a function called set form status. I don't know why it's not showing up. Set form.
Do you have a code generator just like on watch mode right now?
No, I do not.
Oh, and it's felt
Why?
like code is magically appearing.
It might be my snippet, my extreme snippet usage that you're saying, but I do not have any. So there's a function called set form status, which should have popped up when I started typing in the override. But this function will be called every time a new character is typed into this box. And so in there you could, like if you want to do like real-time validation, you check your validation and you go through all of that. So I want us to so what we'll do is we'll use, I can't remember what we named this, genre type, and we'll have again, we can add checks before we do this that the value isn't null, the value isn't empty. For now, we're just going to assume that it's it's all good. So this will be the search term value, and if there's no value, we're just going to default back to computers. Now, I actually do not know all the other categories in there, so I don't know if we'll get any values back, but we can always just
Try
we'll just
cooking.
see.
That's got to be a category.
Cooking does have to be one. You are correct. So I'm going to restart this. And if everything has been set up, what will happen? No, I still actually need to call this. So to call this function the future to run, there's an initialize function that view model uses. So you can call it directly also future to run, and it will just rerun all of that. But the initialize has some additional things that it does to make sure that values are cleared. There's no old errors and all that. So when I call initialize, it will go through the normal future view model lifecycle from the beginning and give you that same experience. There's a few things that you can skip by just calling future to run, and then you just have to make sure you kind of are in the correct state. That should reload. So if
Now,
I
this is going to try to submit the COO, COO, COOK, right? Because we don't have a button yet.
sorry, I couldn't hear that part.
Oh, this is going to actually submit a network request every keystroke, right?
No. So this is a function called fetch new category, which I'll call from our.
Oh, I thought we were still
No,
in.
so I deleted that
status or
code. No,
Got it. Okay.
No, we don't want to do that. Like if it's for autocomplete, maybe, but not to a full
Yeah.
that returns like all the values that you can think of.
So now you can call this new function in a click event or something. Yeah. The old magnifying glass.
View model. What did we call that now? Fetch new category.
New category. Yeah. Nice.
And it
nice
should
pair
have.
Off.
So if I type
floating action button. no icon. This is a blue circle.
We are not building UIs on this video. So if I do cooking and I click this button, it should load, and there we go.
Let's
cooking.
Go. Nice.
And so you can kind of see like a lot of the things that you need when you're building apps that we've just abstracted that. I've heard the argument that it's not good to teach beginners this way, and I do agree that my channel has never been for complete beginners to programming. It's only been for beginners to Flutter. So I talk about specific concepts, and I expect them to understand like service location and dependency injection and the difference. And so there is the argument, which I actually spoke about today with someone on LinkedIn in the announcement that you guys tagged me in on the Flutter Dev channel. Someone said, hey, this is not good. Beginners will struggle. And I was like, I agree with you. They need to learn the basics of like software engineering and understanding just object-oriented programming. And then after that, a lot of this will make sense. So that was my entire list of things I wanted to go through to kind of cover the basics. I don't know if there's anything else you'd want me to go through. I'm open to any questions or going to anything else that we need to.
Yeah, so I do have a few starred questions. I also just wanted to comment, like, nobody in the world is crotchetier than engineers. So obviously someone was going to show up and be like, well, actually, these patterns aren't totally optimized for everyone. And like, that's why we all learned how to add in first grade before our teacher handed us a calculator. Like, before you can effectively use something possibly magical, you should at least understand what it's doing. You know, like the rabbit is just under the table, it doesn't magically appear in the hat. Once you know that, then you can perform the magic trick. And I think that absolutely applies to programming as well. It's like, build some Flutter stuff, type out this boilerplate yourself, think through it, and then all of these packages, so helpful.
Yeah. And that's,
okay, we do have some questions here. So if you want, Dane, we can just go to the, I don't know, maybe you'll dip back into code, but for now, maybe we can just talk. And I know you haven't been able to look at chat for a while, so if you want, you can pull that back up.
Okay, can I do that now?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
All
Hey, I
right.
can
So
finally see you. I've just been speaking to my
yeah.
screen with no face.
I've been making a lot of funny faces here, and then there's one where Dane can't see them. Okay, so one question going all the way back to the beginning. What are your thoughts on provider versus Riverpod as your internal thing? I've been guessing what your thinking might be through this stream here, but I'd love to hear it from you.
So at the moment, or when it came out the first time, I used it and I couldn't see the additional benefit that I would get given that I use 3% of provider. It's just the change notifier and the like the selector or like whatever it is.
Hmm.
I only use those two things. And if we needed more than that, I would think about like provider. And at the moment, Stack doesn't, because we just, like you saw, the state management is extremely simple. You call the rebuild UI, it will rebuild the UI. We don't have like nested scopes, any of those things, which if we needed that, I would definitely swap over to Riverpod, given that, like Rem has also said, hey, this is a much better solution compared to provider. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that was more or less exactly what I was concluding, is that because yeah, you're basically just you're using provider to go grab something, and then there's a lot of other opinions in Riverpod that I don't imagine it would be obvious at all how to
Hmm.
appropriately wire them into this kind of whole ecosystem going on with Stack. So, okay, that matched my expectations. Um, oh, this was a good question again from Miguel. Is it possible to show things on screen like dialogues or navigate without having to use a service, something similar to Block Listener? And first of all, well, I guess let's talk about Block Listener, because even if you, Dane, are familiar, someone in chat won't be. So in the Block
Hmm.
package, um, you have this kind of separate thing. It's called the block, and it stands for business logic component, and it basically gets input events and it modifies the state, and then it kicks the state back out to the UI. And so you have a block builder that is basically like a stream builder, and every time someone does something, a user does something in your UI, that sends a state, or sorry, an event into the block. It computes the new state, and it kicks it back to the UI into that block builder. But all the block builder can do is emit widgets. It can't do imperative things like send a network request or navigate or load a dialog like we saw earlier here. So Block has this other widget called Block Listener, and it also gets to know about every single state, but it doesn't build anything. It just has a function, and you can call whatever code you want in that function. Like, it gets a build context, so you can show a modal, you can navigate, you can kind of do these different things. So that is, like this question says, it keeps that kind of extra logic in your UI code as opposed to in your state management code. And now, Dane, to you, how do you think about all that with Stack?
Yeah. So we used to, we had a similar approach where our dialogues would be in our UI. And this was before so this was when I was still kind of like learning Flutter and wanted to just get better with stuff. And then as I wanted to like as there were bugs and I wanted to check if it's my code or what's happening, I then like did that abstraction. So in terms of how Stacked works, you can use Flutter as you would normally use it. We don't have maybe we should have something like that. We don't have something that will fire once the state has changed so that you can inspect and add something on top of that. So
Mm,
I guess it would be as simple as like adding into our like rebuild UI or the notify list is override, just something to kind of say, hey, the state has updated. Do you want to do anything with this information? And then you'd be able to do something
mhm,
like that within the stacked view. And what I would usually do is just like give an override so it's not within your UI building section. So I like to keep that completely separate, like your widget tree. So I'll just give another override in the stacked view where you'd get the bold context, you'll get all that stuff,
Hmm.
and then you'll be able to just make a decision at that point. That's actually a good idea. I might just make a note while I'm on this call,
Nice.
just so
Yeah,
that I can.
I really like the block listener pattern from that library, but I also like what you're saying. I don't love I don't love those long functions in the widget tree.
Hmm,
It's a lot of random checks, user auth state stuff maybe,
yep.
and yeah, it definitely obscures the UI that you're actually building. Okay, let's see some other questions here. Into my starred ones, but I think I see some. Oh, here. Okay, this is actually a pretty interesting one. First of all, a lot. I don't know how much you're scrolling up in the chat on your screen, Dane, but a lot of praise. Well done. People love Stacked, and we had a great
Nice.
90-minute tour of it. Um, Kind of like more edge case stuff. How do you think about wiring in features like caching state, maybe persisting stuff?
Hmm.
I mean, I think I could field this question, I'm pretty sure, but as the author, I'd like to let you have it.
Yeah. So we were actually recently discussing, me and Fernando, what we could build as a tool that might not be stack specific, and we ended up with the ability to be able to replay your states that a user has experienced if they opted in, obviously, like in production, so that you can get this, so that you can like replay your state locally and then see exactly what caused the bug. And so that led us down the discussion of like adding like state rehydration into stacked, what that would take. It currently does not support state rehydration. What we do is we will just, like, if an app needs it, we would just write it manually. It takes one service and then storing some specific values, but it is a manual setup compared to the rest of stacked. One other thing we want to do is, like, for instance, on the web, when you navigate to a view with some values in the model and you refresh, it kind of loses all of the data that was passed through to it. And so what we are going to be adding at some point soon probably is just storing that into the local shared preferences. If they wanted to be secured, we would just swap to the secured shared preferences. And then when you refresh, we'll just read that from the view and rebuild the entire widget tree as it was. That's how far we've gone. We have thought of it. We did not build anything like that yet. I saw that Block has a nice like rehydration package, so we'll probably
Hmm.
look at how
Yeah,
they're
I actually
doing
haven't
some
looked at
of
that
that.
myself. I've never really bothered. um, Oh, here's one. I was wondering about some error handling as well myself. So if an API service throws an exception uh, and show dialogue, what I think they mean here is showing a dialogue to say like, "Uh-oh, we had an error." I
And
think
then
this is what Supma means.
hmm.
Do we need, as a stacked user, to implement all of those error handling show dialogues ourselves, or is there something on Rails for that?
So the show dialogue. So the way that we generate dialogues is like through the CLI, and you just get a normal like stacked view. That way you can do your state and all that stuff, and then that dialogue is like reusable throughout. So I don't know if that answers the question, but we have general like error dialogues and then like alert ones, and you can just say show this dialogue with a type, or you can show your own custom dialogue. Um, I don't know if that answers the
Yeah,
question because it's not.
I think.
Yeah.
I think what the reality of using Stacked is that you're going to have to watch for those exceptions yourself, and then you're going to have to um, call. You're going to have to surface the appropriate modal or take the appropriate reaction. But
Mm.
there are some off-the-shelf modals that you can use. If you like them.
Yeah. So we have, yeah. So in that case, like if you are using the future view model or the stream view model or any of the special view models, you would get the on error callback with the exact exception. You can do it in there, or you can enable like throw exception in your view model, and it will not catch it and just be like, here's an exception. And so it will give you the Flutter red screen if you don't catch it, or if you catch it at that point, you handle it the way you want to do it. So we have those two
Mm,
options. We like the on-error override, although we don't use it a lot. We let the HTTP server and those things kind of handle us and give us a value back, which we then decide on based on that value how to do certain things.
incredible. I think we're basically at the end of questions here. Dane, I am
Hmm.
so impressed. Stacked is Stacked looks great, man. And it doesn't, it looks like it's intense to build. I mean, you're using um, a lot of code generation, you got the CLI going. I imagine your internal testing here. You talk about how it's appropriate to assume code you don't own is fully tested. Well,
Hmm.
eh, you're the one who's testing everything that Stacks does,
Yeah.
and man, it looks like it is quite an effort. So really, very, very, very cool. Very cool.
Thanks, man.
What do you think of it as? Is it a whole framework? Is it an app development framework?
Yeah, so I think of it as a meta framework on top of Flutter, and that's because it's completely compatible with how Flutter works. We don't side cut, we don't ignore the build context, we don't try to hide it. We just have certain things in place to qualify, to make sure that we adhere to our core principle, which is testable code. That's the
Mm,
only reason we have some of these abstractions. And if we take some of these abstractions away, most of our code will not be testable. Like you'll still be able to UI test it, but not unit test it. And so I guess
mm,
if I lighten up ever on the unit testing specific thing, we might be able to say like, okay, these abstractions are confusing to some Flutter users. Maybe, yeah. And so it's a meta framework that we've put together. Like I said, we are not reinventing anything. We are using the best packages, even for our bottom sheets builder. We didn't build out, we just used one of the bottom sheet packages that allows us to
mm,
do scrolling and additional things, and like the half scroll, all of that stuff. We used someone else's package, and that's being used in there because we just think that there's no point in reinventing the wheel if you don't need to. Like like PubDev gives
yep.
us so many options, so I would never
Yeah, you
go
never
against.
would have finished. Never would
Yeah,
have finished Stacked if you were building all those things yourself.
yeah, yeah. Because we've been doing a lot of the stuff, and because everything's open source, it's been a lot easier. Like I didn't know how to use the code generator, so I looked at Freeze, for instance, to
Hmm.
understand what was done there, and then I looked at like auto route, and we at first used auto route like with Stacked, which was a package you had to add, and then eventually we're like, okay, to teach this to someone, it's taking a bit longer and longer to explain
Hmm.
auto route first. So why don't we encapsulate that? Just give it our own naming, use the exact same code, give it our naming. And then I spoke to the author and I asked him twice actually, like, hey, are you sure that I
You
can
okay with this? Yeah.
I'm gonna use this code in mine and it will not be like referring yours anymore? And he was like, it's code, you can use it. So I'm
Nice.
very grateful for his for his
That's a great open source
agreement.
mindset.
Yeah. And so I like we see it as a meta framework. That's why we have the CLI.
Mm,
It has its own docs. We are very opinionated in how we do stuff. We have a stacked config which allows you to change your folder structure, and then it will still generate the same way in different places. So we don't like have an opinion on the folder structures, but the way the code is like written and the separation between services and the view models, we wanted to keep that in place. And if we teach anything to anyone, we wanted them to learn it in that way. And this all came from like me running an agency and having to not only build one app and continuously do that for like 3 to 5 years, but it would be with like 30
hmm.
apps
You're
over
starting
5 years.
over constantly.
Yeah. And so we wanted
Yeah.
best practices so we could hit back and like keep the old apps up to date with the latest easily. And if we are
Hmm.
building it, then it's easy to do that. And so yeah, it's built based on what's required for us in production. how to maintain. So there's a bunch of other stuff we didn't go through. Like we have a stacked logger, which you can then enable like your Crashlytics. We have like Firebase authentication packages. We have like Google Cloud Logger that you can just like add in, and it would just log whatever you're logging to the cloud. Yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff that we've catered for. We could maybe do a deeper dive, or I'll actually do a full deep dive at some point with like all the new features, and that'll go onto the channel where, yeah, it will live forever.
Yeah, nice. All right. Well, gosh, there's just tons of love for Stacked. Go-to project, last 4 years. Abhishek, another GDE. Been using it for the past few weeks. Really good.
Oh,
Those are just the
nice.
ones on my screen right now. So, Abhishek, or I mean, hi, Abhishek. Dane, I have a very small memory stack in my brain, and I can't keep track of more than like 2 things. Dane, thanks for coming on. Thanks for walking us all through Stacked. I'm really excited to know more about it now.
Awesome.
And yeah, any final thoughts before we sign off?
Well, thank you for having me on here. I've been watching obviously, and I didn't even know that anyone on the Flutter side knew about Stack, because I like one of my core principles when teaching is to always say, hey, this is how I do something, and then I stop at that point. I don't want to say you should do it exactly like me, or this is the
Mhm.
best way to do. And so I've never like promoted Stacked. If someone like asks me about something else, I'll answer that question. I'm not going to say, but I have my Stack thing.
Mhm.
So I was very surprised, and Fernando was also quite happy, or my wife was quite happy. We were all like, yay, this is going to be so cool. So I just want to say thank you for always looking through the packages and kind of looking at our community and see like what we are doing. I know we all
Yeah,
appreciate that. I appreciate it. So thank you for that. And yeah, I'll probably see you on the next GDE call.
sounds great.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you think, out there, you got folks building stuff, you think the Flutter team, isn't watching, we're watching. We love the stuff well built. All right. Well, folks, that will do it for today. So, hope you enjoyed learning about Stacked, and we'll be back next week with a to be determined topic. Dane, have a great week and weekend, and whichever of those comes first. And folks, see you on the next episode.
All right. Cheers, Greg.